Imagine waking up one morning feeling exhausted, although your body has technically rested. You stretch, rub your eyes, make your coffee, scroll through your notifications, and for some reason your chest still feels heavy, like something invisible is pressing on you. You tell yourself, maybe I'm just tired, but deep down you sense a quiet confusion. Why do I feel drained when nothing particularly bad is happening? Why does everything feel heavier than it should? Today, I want to pull back the curtain and talk about something ancient, subtle, and surprisingly modern at the same time. 3 emotional toxins that silently accumulate inside us until life feels heavier, slower, and oddly out of sync. These toxins don't come from the food we eat or the air we breathe. They come from a mind, quietly growing, quietly poisoning, quietly stealing our peace. And most of us walk around with them every day without ever naming them. The first toxin is attachment, not in the romantic sense, not even in the sentimental sense, but in the deeply mental sense. Attachment is that invisible rope we tie around outcomes, identities, achievements, and even people, believing that without them, our world collapses. We cling to the idea of who we should be, more successful, more impressive, faster, richer, more put together. We cling to the approval of others, the likes, the praise, the subtle nods that make us feel momentarily validated. We cling to comfort, even when comfort slowly suffocates our growth. And the funny part? When we cling the hardest, we often feel the emptiest. Attachment drains energy because it demands constant maintenance. You're always checking whether things are going the way you want, whether people still like you, whether life still matches your ideal picture. It's like carrying a fragile vase everywhere, clutching it, guarding it, stressing over it cracking, yet never realizing that you don't even need to be holding it in the first place. This constant emotional gripping turns calm minds into tense ones, and tense ones into exhausted ones. Then comes the second toxin, aversion, the instinct to push away discomfort, avoid tough conversations, dodge unpleasant truths, and escape anything that doesn't match our liking. Aversion feels like resistance, like a subtle no echoing in the background of your mind. You avoid calling that person back because the conversation might be awkward. You delay facing your finances because the numbers might hurt. You run from silence because silence forces you to meet yourself. Aversion doesn't drain energy the way a sprint does. It drains energy the way a slow leak in a tire does. You don't notice it at first, but eventually your motivation softens. Your clarity becomes foggy and your courage shrinks. Every time you avoid something, you aren't just postponing a task. You are reinforcing a belief that you are not capable of facing it. And that belief becomes a toxin that eats away at confidence from the inside. Avoidance looks like rest, but it is not rest. It is procrastination dressed in a soft blanket. And deep down you know the truth, which is why you feel uneasy even when you're technically doing nothing. And then there's the third toxin, subtle and sneaky, ignorance, not the lack of intelligence, but the lack of awareness, the refusal to look inward, the unconscious autopilot we live on. Ignorance is when you repeat patterns without understanding them, when you react instead of respond, when you assume instead of investigate, when you judge instead of pause. It is the blindness to your own emotional roots. You snap at someone but never ask why anger rose in the first place. You feel jealous but never question what insecurity that jealousy is protecting. You feel lost but never take time to wonder what direction actually means to you. The true danger of ignorance is not that it hides truths, but that it hides the fact that truths are missing. You can't fix what you won't face, and you won't face what you don't even see. So you end up walking through life with emotional fog, wondering why everything feels just a little out of focus. And that quiet disorientation becomes a daily fatigue, a mental weight that grows heavier because you cannot describe it, cannot locate it, cannot evaluate it. It's like a computer running a dozen background programs you never opened, slowing everything down. These three toxins, attachment, aversion, and ignorance, work together like a triangle of self-inflicted pressure. Attachment pulls you forward with craving. Aversion pushes you backward with fear. Ignorance clouds you in the middle with confusion. Suddenly, you aren't living your life. You're reacting to it. You aren't choosing your direction. You're being dragged by desires, pushed by fears, and blinded by unexamined patterns. And the world we live in only amplifies these toxins. Social media fuels attachment. Everyone curating versions of success that feel mandatory to achieve. The busyness culture fuels aversion. Everyone glorifying productivity while quietly running from emotions. And the information overload fuels ignorance. So many voices telling you what to think that you forget to ask what you truly believe. But here's where it gets interesting. These toxins don't need to be fought. They need to be understood. When you try to fight them directly, you create more tension, more frustration, more internal war. But when you observe them, name them, and bring them into the light, they begin to loosen. Naturally, awareness is the antidote. Imagine you begin noticing attachment. You catch yourself scrolling photos and feeling that tiny sting of comparison. Instead of judging yourself for wanting validation, you simply whisper internally, "Ah, I see you." That's attachment. You breathe. You release your grip. You realize you don't need control everything. Suddenly the weight in your chest softens. The pressure to perform lessens. You start moving from authenticity instead of insecurity, doing things because they matter, not because they prove something. Then imagine you begin noticing aversion. You delay a task and feel that familiar tug of avoidance. But this time, instead of escaping to your phone, you pause and ask, what am I afraid of facing right now? Maybe it's failure. Maybe it's discomfort. Maybe it's simply boredom. You name it, and naming dissolves half the fear. You learn to approach small discomforts with curiosity, and slowly, resistance loses its power. And finally, imagine noticing ignorance, not as something shameful, but as something human. You see yourself reacting impulsively, and instead of beating yourself up, you become curious. What triggered me? What story did I tell myself? What wound did this touch? Little by little, layers peel back. You begin recognizing patterns that once controlled you. Awareness becomes a lantern shining into corners you didn't even know existed. When the toxins weaken, you don't just feel lighter, you feel more yourself. Life stops feeling like a storm to endure and becomes something you navigate with clarity. The mind feels less like a battlefield and more like a home you're finally cleaning, room by room. And with each room you clear, breathing becomes easier, focus becomes sharper, rest becomes restful. So if you've been feeling tired lately without understanding why, consider looking inward rather than outward. Maybe the heaviness isn't from your workload or your relationships or your schedule. Maybe it's from carrying unseen emotional weight, gripping too hard, avoiding too much, or running on autopilot for too long. These toxins don't make you weak. They make you human. And recognizing them doesn't solve everything instantly, but it opens a doorway to clarity, to calm, to a softer heart and a stronger mind. In a world that constantly tells you to hustle, to push, to build, to shine, maybe the real strength lies in the quiet act of noticing what's happening inside you. Because once you understand your inner world, the outer world becomes far easier to navigate. You stop being swept away by every emotion every pressure, every storm. You begin living with intention, with balance, with a sense of grounded freedom. So today, as you move forward with your life, take a moment to check in with yourself. Ask gently, what am I clinging to? What am I avoiding? What am I unaware of? And whatever answers rise up, welcome them. They are not your enemies. They are your teachers. And once you learn from them, the toxins lose their power, and your energy returns like sunlight after a long, cloudy morning. You feel lighter not because life becomes easy, but because you finally stop carrying unnecessary weight. You finally breathe with your whole chest. You finally feel like yourself again. And when you finally feel like yourself again, something beautiful begins to happen. Almost quietly, almost shyly, like a flower opening before sunrise. You start noticing small things you used to ignore. The warmth of morning light on your skin. The gentle rhythm of your own breathing. The way silence doesn't scare you as much anymore. The way your mind feels a little lighter, a little clearer. Like someone has finally opened a window inside you and let the stale air escape. This is what happens when the mind is no longer crowded by the three toxins. Space appears. Clarity appears. And with clarity comes strength. Not the loud kind, but the steady kind, the kind that doesn't shake just because the world is noisy. People often think inner peace is something mystical, something monks achieve on mountaintops. But the truth is far more humble. Inner peace begins with honesty, the courage to sit with yourself and simply witness what's happening within, not fixing it, not judging it, just witnessing. And the more you witness, the more layers begin dissolving, layer after layer, until one day you look at yourself and think, oh, so this is what it feels like to be present. Presence is not a luxury. Presence is a foundation of a meaningful life. When you are present, decisions become easier because they come from clarity instead of impulse. Relationships become gentler because you stop projecting your fears onto others. Work becomes more enjoyable because it's no longer tangled with insecurity or avoidance. Even rest becomes more meaningful because it's no longer haunted by guilt or mental clutter. Presence allows you to finally live instead of merely surviving. But of course, life is still life. Challenges don't disappear just because your mind is clearer. People will still misunderstand you. Stress will still show up. The world will still push and pull in every direction. And you will still face moments where attachment, aversion, and ignorance sneak back in quietly, unexpectedly, like old friends hoping you haven't moved on. But the difference now is that you recognize them. They no longer camouflage themselves in your thoughts. You can see when you're clinging too tightly. You can feel when you're avoiding something. You can sense when you're slipping into autopilot. Awareness doesn't eliminate struggles. It makes you impossible to fool. And once you're no longer fooled by your own mind, everything changes. You walk differently. You speak differently. You choose differently. You no longer chase validation like a thirsty wanderer chasing mirages. You no longer run from discomfort like it's a monster hiding under the bed. You no longer fear your emotions as if they're storms that will drown you. You stand in yourself, not perfectly, not flawlessly, but honestly. And honesty is the most solid ground any human can stand on. Slowly, a new kind of courage begins to grow inside you. Not the reckless kind, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet courage to look life in the eye and say, I am here. I am aware. I am willing. Willing to face hard truths. Willing to feel uncomfortable emotions. Willing to let go of what no longer fits the person you are becoming. This willingness is the doorway to transformation. Not sudden transformation, Not overnight transformation, but the kind that stays, the kind that roots deep into your character. With time, you begin to understand that peace was never about escaping difficulty. It was about meeting difficulty with a steady heart. Happiness was never about achieving everything. It was about shedding what weighs you down. Wisdom was never about knowing more. It was about understanding yourself more deeply. And strength was never about being unbreakable. It was about being flexible, resilient, able to bend without losing your core. And maybe the most surprising discovery is this. Once the toxins loosen their grip, your natural compassion returns. You start seeing others differently. You understand their struggles not as annoyances, but as reflections of the same battles you fought. You speak softer. You listen deeper. You judge less. You empathize more. You become a presence that calms rather than agitates, a presence that encourages rather than criticizes. And people feel that energy. They notice the lightness in the way you carry yourself. They may not know exactly what changed, but they feel it, because inner clarity radiates outward. Eventually, a new insight settles into your mind like a final piece of a puzzle. Life isn't meant to be perfect, but it is meant to be lived fully. And you can only live fully when you stop carrying the unnecessary, when you stop gripping, stop running, stop ignoring. When you start seeing with honesty, acting with intention, and resting with openness, the world becomes less threatening. The future becomes less intimidating. Your past becomes less heavy. And your present, finally your present becomes alive. And if someday you feel lost again, tired again, confused again, which you will, because you are human, remember that these toxins don't return because you failed. They return because that is the nature of the mind. To forget, to drift, to get tangled. And your job is simply to notice, untangle, and return. Again and again, with patience, with courage, with a gentle strength that comes from knowing you walked through this before and emerged wiser each time. Because at the end of it all, the real victory is not in eliminating the toxins forever. The real victory is in becoming someone who can recognize them, understand them, and rise above them with calm awareness. And when you can do that, the heaviness fades, the confusion fades, the fatigue fades. What remains is a quieter, clearer, more grounded version of yourself, one that has always been there, waiting beneath the noise. And that version of you is not fragile. It is not easily shaken. It is steady, thoughtful, aware, and deeply alive. And as this grounded version of you slowly steps forward, day after day, something remarkable unfolds. You begin to trust yourself again, not in the superficial way of repeating affirmations or hyping yourself up, but in the deep, quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can face your inner world without running. This is the kind of trust that stays with you even on difficult days. The kind of trust that whispers, you've walked through the dark before. You can walk through it again. And suddenly the uncertainties of life don't seem like threats anymore. They seem like invitations. Every challenge becomes a teacher. Every disappointment becomes a mirror. Every emotion becomes a messenger. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start wondering, what is this showing me? It's a shift so subtle yet so powerful that it changes the way you breathe, the way you decide, the way you carry yourself through the world. You may start noticing that the things you used to chase relentlessly no longer hold the same power over you. Praise feels nice but not essential. Success feels meaningful but not defining. People's opinions become interesting data, not laws you must obey. And failures, those moments you used to fear like a burning fire, begin to feel like stepping stones. You learn that losing something is not the same as losing yourself. You learn that mistakes don't define you. They refine you. You learn that falling short is just part of growing tall. And with that growth comes a quiet liberation, a sense of inner spaciousness you haven't felt in years. You begin moving through life with less rush and more intention. You walk slower but see more. You speak less but say more. You work with focus instead of frenzy. You rest with permission instead of guilt. Life begins to feel less like a race and more like a dance. You're still moving, still striving, still stretching forward, but with rhythm, with balance, with breath. Somewhere along this journey, gratitude sneaks in, not forced, not performative, but natural. You start appreciating the small wins, the small joys, the small moment of clarity. You realize that peace was never hiding in the extraordinary. It was quietly waiting in the ordinary, in the moments you rushed past when your mind was busy fighting its inner battles. The smell of your morning coffee, the way sunlight hits your wall, the softness of your pillow, the way a loved one laughs. These things suddenly feel richer, fuller, more alive. When the toxins loosen, your senses return. The world becomes vivid again. And maybe the most touching part of all is that you begin treating yourself differently. You speak to yourself with kindness instead of criticism. You give yourself grace without making excuses. You hold yourself accountable without cruelty. You no longer demand perfection. You encourage progress. You no longer punish yourself for slipping. You guide yourself back with patience. This inner gentleness doesn't weaken you. It strengthens you, because a mind at war with itself is always exhausted. But a mind that supports itself becomes unstoppable. As this inner support grows, your relationships change too. You start recognizing which connections nourish you and which connections drain you. You become more selective, not from arrogance but from clarity. You stop tolerating emotional chaos, manipulation, or disrespect, not because you're better than anyone, but because your peace has become too precious to hand over carelessly. And with this boundary comes a newfound courage to walk away from situations that no longer align with who you're becoming. Walking away no longer feels like losing. It feels like choosing. And perhaps that's what all of this leads to: a sense of choice, a sense of agency. A recognition that your emotional landscape is not something you're trapped inside of. It's something you can shape, influence, and navigate. Life will always bring storms, but you don't have to be the storm. You can be the sky, vast, calm, steady, letting the weather pass through without losing your essence. When you reach this point, you start noticing that even when you feel overwhelmed, the overwhelm doesn't swallow you like it used to. Even when you feel anxious, the anxiety doesn't define the whole day. Even when you feel sad, the sadness doesn't become your identity. Emotions become experiences, not prisons. And from this emotional freedom rises a deep, enduring resilience. The resilience of someone who knows themselves. Someone who understands their patterns, their triggers, their strengths, their shadows. Someone who can sit with discomfort without collapsing. Someone who can embrace joy without fearing it will disappear. Someone who can live with openness instead of armor. This kind of person walks with a presence that others can feel even before they speak. Not loud, not flashy, but steady, warm, grounded. And as you grow into this person little by little, breath by breath, experience by experience, you begin to realize a simple truth. The real journey was never about fixing yourself. It was about understanding yourself, accepting yourself, being with yourself. And once you learn to do that, the toxins lose their grip not because you force them out, but because they no longer have a place to hide. And as this understanding deepens within you, something begins to settle quietly, confidently, like dust landing on a still surface after a long storm. You realize that the true purpose of awareness is not to make life easier, but to make you wiser. Because wisdom doesn't come from avoiding storms. It comes from learning how to walk through them with your eyes open. And when you start living with that kind of clarity, you begin to see that every internal struggle you've ever faced has shaped you in ways comfort never could. The frustration taught you patience. The heartbreak taught you depth. The uncertainty taught you courage. The confusion taught you humility. Every moment of heaviness was not punishment. It was preparation. And now, standing here with a clearer mind and a softer heart, you begin to understand that your journey has always been twofold: learning yourself and unlearning the illusions that hid your true self. You unlearn the belief that you must be perfect to be worthy. You unlearn the idea that productivity equals value. You unlearn the fear that vulnerability is weakness. You unlearn the habit of abandoning yourself just to keep the peace. As each illusion falls away, what remains is something honest, raw, and incredibly powerful: the real you. The real you is not the version shaped by pressure, fear, or comparison. The real you is not the version that hides behind busyness or distraction. The real you is the one who's been quietly waiting underneath every layer of doubt, insecurity, and emotional noise. And when this real self begins to rise, life itself begins to shift. Decisions that once felt impossible become clear. Boundaries that once felt terrifying become natural. Dreams that once felt unrealistic become reachable. Because the moment you stop fighting your inner world, you unlock the energy to build your outer world. With this newfound strength, you begin looking at the future with fresh eyes. Not as a threat, not as a burden, but as an unfolding landscape full of paths you haven't walked yet. You stop expecting perfection from tomorrow and start welcoming growth. You stop fearing change and start participating in it. You stop clinging to what's familiar just because it feels safe, and start embracing what's right because it feels true. And piece by piece, you construct a life that doesn't drain you, it supports you. A life that doesn't trap you, it expands you. But the most beautiful transformation, perhaps, is the relationship you develop with your own inner silence. What once felt empty or uncomfortable starts to feel peaceful. Silence becomes a place you visit to reset, to breathe, to listen. Because beneath the noise of your thoughts, there's a deeper voice, a steady, calm, intuitive voice that has been with you since the beginning. And now that the toxins are quieted, you can finally hear it. You can hear the guidance hidden beneath the chaos. You can hear the truth behind your confusion. You can hear the wisdom that was drowned out by attachment, avoidance, and ignorance. And this inner voice becomes your compass. Not because it shouts, but because it whispers exactly what you need to know. And as time passes, you start living with a new kind of rhythm. You no longer rush through days as if they're tasks to be completed. You move through them as moments to be experienced. You savor the small pauses. You appreciate the simple joys. You trust the unfolding of your own story. And slowly, gently, naturally, you begin to love the life you're building. Not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. And in this truth, you find something far more precious than comfort. You find meaning. Meaning in your struggles. Meaning in your growth. Meaning in the way your heart breaks and heals, again and again, each time opening just a little wider. Meaning in the way you fall, rise, fall, rise. Always learning, always evolving. Always moving forward in ways you don't even realize until you look back. And when you finally look back, you see that every moment of heaviness, confusion, and fatigue was guiding you toward this clarity. You weren't lost, you were being reshaped. And perhaps, At the very end of this long journey inward, you arrive at a simple, profound realization. You are not fragile. You are not failing. You are not broken. You are becoming more aware, becoming more grounded, becoming more compassionate, becoming more yourself. And the world needs that version of you, the real one, the awake one, the courageous one who has learned to face their inner shadows with honesty and walk through life with a clear, steady heart.